T4 setup, the first thing I like to look at is, am I on the right side? You want to make sure your hopper, and that's where your magnetic is going to line up right here, is on the same side as where your flip switch is for your blower, okay? And these feet in the back need to be raised about 3 inches above the ground and about 1 inch off the ground when you're, about 3 inches off the ground when you're dry trimming and about 1 inch off the ground when you're wet trimming. And then the front, you just want to keep it bottomed out on the front. So 3 inches in the back dry trimming, 1 inch when you're wet trimming. As far as the lift goes in the back, you can get a tape measure and actually measure up if you need to. So the first thing you want to cover when you're setting up your T4 is making sure you got the right tumbler in there. So I'm going to show you the 2 different tumblers. See, the one over on this side right here has wider slots. That's your standard tumbler for big nug dry trimming and for wet trimming, okay? With the bigger slot sizes. And this one with the narrower sizes right here is for dry trimming. Okay? So the standard tumbler, they call it that because that's standard. Most of the time you're gonna be using that. But this is good for your smaller buds for when you're dry trimming. Big buds when you're dry trimming and wet trimming also. So standard and narrow. And if you wanna confirm you got a narrow, there's 51 slots on a narrow on each one of these sections. It's kind of monotonous if you need to do it this way, but you can, which you can make a mark and then count how many slots you count around. And if you get 51 for one of these sections, it's a dry tumbler. If you get less, it's a wet tumbler, okay? Or I mean a standard. So next thing, after you've established whether you have a standard or a narrow tumbler, you want to make sure it's not damaged. So what I do is I turn the tumbler on, and then to make sure it's actually not damaged, you got to turn the blades on at the same time because they run underneath it. Turn the blades all the way up. Right now I don't hear my blades hitting at all, so that's the next part. You got to adjust your blades. See little knobs on the back go towards the tighten, so you slightly hear them just tick. Not that much. Slight tick. Oh yeah. Next thing. Next thing, run your leaf collector. Make sure your leaf collector is all good to go. Set up like this, you need to make sure your hopper is on the same side as the switch for your leaf collector. It's obviously going to be on the same side as your belts because it's the only place it can connect, and that your slope goes down from the hopper like this, okay? That's important because that's the way your product is going to flow through there. The next thing is making sure that you got your tumbler cover on, no fingers or dreadlocks in there. You want to have a bottom shroud on there. That shroud strip is what goes across the top of there, just making sure that things are airtight. It's not really crucial, but it does keep the dust out of the room. Next thing is the old clevis pin on the back. There's a little clip that holds what's called a clevis pin on the back of the adjustment bar back here. I can show you what I'm talking about. We've covered it in another video on the adjustments, but just make sure you got your clevis pin in the back of this adjustment bar. You don't want to be missing that. All right, other than that, we just make sure all the nuts and bolts and everything's there, that everything is, you know, like I said, tight on the adjustments on the back. Nothing's hitting. That way you're able to keep it moving. Now the only other thing is you want to make sure when you're feeding your product in here that you got to keep it at the same rate. It's the machine that is gonna get you there, but it's the man that has to make the machine do what it needs to do too, you know? So it still takes man and machine. You have to make sure you're feeding it with the same amount of volume of cannabis into the hopper over and over again at the same amount of time. If you go cracking beers or going to do something else or taking breaks, it's not going to keep feeding it in here the same rate, so it's not going to keep feeding it out the same rate. You got to steadily keep feeding it or get the feed conveyor. But even if you get the feed conveyor, somebody's got to make sure that they're feeding the feed conveyor the whole time. So it is what's called a continuous feed trimmer, where you're going to continuously feed it as you run it in that sense. And that's what, like I said again, keeps the volume of cannabis coming out at the same rate on the other end. So it's your angle, the volume you're putting into it, and the amount of how fast you're putting it in there that's making the biggest difference once you've got it all dialed in here and you're ready to trim. Also, of course, your moisture level. Want to make sure your moisture levels are right, and we'll put those on the screen so that you know what you should be at for dry trimming. I think that's it, and give us a call if you have any questions.